I always knew my sister's husband, Greg, would find some way to belittle my business dreams. But I never imagined he'd mock my startup's inevitable failure during his company's holiday party while his colleagues laughed along. Sometimes the most painful humiliations happen under twinkling lights with a champagne flute in your hand. What happened next changed not just that night, but the entire trajectory of both our careers forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The email invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A sleek digital card with animated snowflakes and corporate branding nestled between supplier negotiations and investor pitch preparations in my inbox. I recognized the sender immediately. Vertex Technologies, the software development company where my brother-in-law Greg had worked for the past 7 years. Their annual holiday gala was apparently approaching, and I had been included on the guest list. "You've been invited," the message announced in elegant font. "Join us for Vertex Technologies' annual winter celebration." I stared at the screen, momentarily confused. Greg and I had never been close. In fact, our interactions at family gatherings typically consisted of thinly veiled condescension from his side and polite restraint from mine. Ever since I'd left my corporate job at Marshall Financial II, years ago to launch my own financial technology startup, TrustFlow, he had taken every opportunity to question my decision. Nora, my co-founder and best friend May, appeared in the doorway of our modest office, her expression curious as she noticed my distraction. "Conference call with the developers starts in 5. Everything okay?" I gestured to my screen. "I just got invited to Greg's company holiday party, Vertex Technologies." May raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "Your brother-in-law, Greg? The one who asked if you were still playing entrepreneur at Thanksgiving?" "The very same," I confirmed, my finger hovering uncertainly over the mouse. Part of me wanted to decline immediately. Our startup was at a critical juncture. We had developed promising technology for streamlining trust accounting systems, but we were still seeking the right strategic partnerships to scale. Every hour counted, and spending an evening deflecting. Greg's subtle jabs about my career choices seemed like a poor use of limited time. But there was another consideration. "Vertex is actually on our partnership prospect list," I told May. "They have the enterprise client base we've been trying to reach." May's expression shifted from skepticism to strategic interest. "So this could actually be useful. Get your foot in the door, make some connections." "Exactly," I nodded, though the knot in my stomach tightened at the thought of navigating both professional networking and family dynamics in one evening. Though I'm sure that's not why Greg included me on the invite list. My sister Eliza called that evening as, "I was reviewing our latest user experience testing results. Did you get the invite to Greg's holiday party?" she asked without preamble when I picked up. "Just this afternoon," I replied, setting aside my work. I was surprised, to be honest. "It was my suggestion," Eliza admitted. "I thought it might be good for you two to connect in a professional setting. Maybe he'd finally see what you've been building if he saw you interacting with other tech professionals." I appreciated my sister's intentions, though I doubted Greg would suddenly develop respect for my career path just because we were surrounded by his colleagues. Eliza had always been the bridge builder in the family, eternally optimistic about resolving tensions between the people she loved. She had married Greg 6 years ago, when we were both still in the corporate world, me at Marshall Financial, him already established at Vertex. In those days, our career discussions had been collegial, if not particularly warm. Everything changed when I left my secure, well-paying position to pursue my startup vision. Greg didn't just question the decision. He seemed personally offended by it, as if my choice somehow devalued his own career path. "I'm not sure one party will change his perspective," I said gently, not wanting to dismiss my sister's efforts. "But I was actually thinking of attending anyway. Vertex has some technology that might complement what we're building at TrustFlow." "That's perfect," Eliza sounded genuinely excited. You can network, and maybe Greg will finally understand that you're building something real. After we hung up, I sat staring at my apartment walls, covered in whiteboards filled with product roadmaps and market strategy notes. TrustFlow had consumed my life for the past 2 years. Endless days, sleepless nights, financial uncertainty, and more challenges than I could have possibly anticipated. We had a small but growing client base, promising technology, and just enough funding to give us runway for another 8 months of development. We weren't an overnight success, but we were making real, tangible progress. Yet whenever I described our milestones to Greg, he would listen with that particular smile, not quite a smirk, but adjacent to one, before asking questions clearly designed to highlight our precarious position. And how does your revenue compare to your burn rate? Or, what's your contingency plan when the funding runs out? Never celebrating wins, always probing for vulnerabilities. The week before the holiday party passed in the usual startup chaos. A key developer caught the flu, an important demo had technical glitches, and our main competitor announced a new feature uncomfortably similar to what we'd been developing. By Friday evening, as I stood in front of my closet contemplating what to wear to the Vertex event, I was seriously reconsidering my decision to attend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Just wear something that makes you feel powerful, my roommate Tasha advised, leaning against my bedroom doorway. A corporate attorney herself, she understood professional politics better than most. And remember why you're going. Connections that could help TrustFlow, not approval from your brother-in-law. I finally selected a tailored burgundy suit, professional enough for a corporate gathering, but distinct from the typical black and navy uniforms that dominated such events. As I fastened a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a flowing river, our company's unofficial emblem, I reminded myself of Tasha's words. This wasn't about Greg. It was about potential opportunities for TrustFlow. The Vertex Technologies Holiday Gala was being held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a luxury venue in the financial district. As my rideshare pulled up to the entrance, I felt the familiar flutter of networking anxiety in my stomach, that unique blend of anticipation and apprehension that comes with entering a room full of strangers who might become allies, clients, or dead ends. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with crystalline decorations catching the light from strategically placed uplighting. Corporate success practically radiated from the expensive decorations, premium open bar, and lavish buffet stations. A string quartet played in one corner, providing elegant background music for the hundreds of people in formal attire engaged in animated conversation. I had just accepted a glass of champagne from a circulating server when I spotted Eliza waving from across the room. She looked beautiful in an emerald green dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly. Greg stood beside her, deep in conversation with an older man whose body language suggested significant authority. You made it. Eliza hugged me warmly when I reached them. Nora, you remember Greg's boss, Richard Harmon? He's the chief strategy officer now. The distinguished man turned, offering his hand with a practiced smile. Ms. Chen, we met at Greg and Eliza's wedding, if I recall correctly. You were with Marshall Financial then. That's right, I confirmed, pleasantly surprised. He remembered. Though I've ventured into entrepreneurship since then. Greg cleared his throat slightly. Nora's trying her hand at a startup, he said, his tone carrying that familiar note of condescension barely masked as casual explanation. Something in financial technology. I bit back the immediate correction that wanted to spring forth. That I wasn't trying my hand, but had successfully launched and was running a promising company with growing market traction. Instead, I smiled directly at Richard. TrustFlow specializes in modernizing trust accounting systems, I explained. We're bringing automation and real-time reporting to a sector that's been using essentially the same processes for decades. Richard's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine interest. Trust accounting? That's actually been a pain point for several of our enterprise clients. The legacy systems are remarkably resistant to integration with modern platforms. Before I could respond, Greg smoothly interjected. Speaking of enterprise clients, Richard, I've been meaning to discuss the Westlake proposal with you. They're looking for some customizations to our security protocols. He placed a hand on his boss's shoulder, subtly angling his body to edge me out of the conversation. I caught Eliza's apologetic glance but shook my head slightly to indicate it was fine. This was familiar territory. I excused myself gracefully and made my way toward one of the buffet stations, using the opportunity to scan the room for other potentially valuable connections. Over the next hour, I engaged in the standard holiday party mingling, brief conversations, business card exchanges, and the delicate dance of finding mutual connections or interests. I had just finished a promising discussion with a Vertex product manager who seemed genuinely interested in TrustFlow's application programming interface capabilities when I felt a presence at my elbow, Nora Chen. The voice belonged to a woman perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. "I've been hoping to meet you." I didn't recognize her, though the Vertex executive badge she wore indicated she was someone significant in the company. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage," I admitted. "Vivian Mehta," she introduced herself. "I head Vertex's Strategic Acquisitions and Partnerships division." My interest immediately sharpened. Strategic partnerships were exactly what we needed at this stage of TrustFlow's development. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Mehta. May I ask how you know who I am?" "I make it my business to know about promising innovations in financial technology," she replied with a slight smile, "particularly when they address pain points for our clients. Your work with trust accounting systems has appeared on my radar several times in recent months." We found a relatively quiet corner where Vivian asked detailed, insightful questions about TrustFlow's technology, business model, and growth strategy. Unlike many corporate executives I'd encountered, she seemed to grasp both the technical complexity and market opportunity of what we were building without lengthy explanations. "We should continue this conversation in a more formal setting," she suggested after about 20 minutes. "Would you be available for a meeting next week? I'd like to introduce you to our financial services product team." I was carefully controlling my expression to hide my excitement at this unexpected opportunity when Greg appeared, 2 drinks in hand. He offered one to Vivian with a deferential smile I'd never seen him direct at me. "Thought you might need a refresh, Vivian," he said smoothly. "I see you've met my sister-in-law." "Indeed," Vivian nodded. "We've been having a fascinating discussion about her company's trust accounting solutions." Greg's smile flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Ah, her little startup. Yes, it's a cute project. Very admirable to pursue a dream, even if the market realities are challenging." He turned to me with that familiar expression, concern layered over condescension. "How's your runway looking these days, Nora? Still going to hit those projections you mentioned at Thanksgiving?" The question was perfectly calculated to undermine me, phrased as friendly interest while implying financial precariousness to a potential business partner. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound defensive, Vivian spoke. "From what Ms. Chen has shared, TrustFlow's metrics are actually quite impressive for their stage," she said, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of correction. "Early-stage companies often show more innovation potential than established players precisely because they're not constrained by legacy thinking." Greg's expression tightened momentarily before he recovered. Of course. I just worry about Nora. The startup failure statistics are so daunting. 90% don't make it past the first few years, right? It takes a certain business acumen to beat those odds." The implication that I lacked such acumen hung in the air. I had endured countless variations of this conversation with Greg, usually choosing to let his jabs slide in the interest of family harmony. But here, in a professional context, with a potential strategic partner witnessing his dismissal of my capabilities, the stakes were different. TrustFlow is actually entering its third year with 40% year-over-year client growth, I stated calmly, meeting his gaze directly. Our customer retention rate is 97%, and we've reduced our client acquisition costs by 30% in the last quarter alone. I'd be happy to walk you through our financials sometime if you're genuinely concerned, Greg. Vivian's subtle nod of approval wasn't lost on me, nor was the flash of annoyance in Greg's eyes. Well, we're all pulling for you, he said with a tight smile. It would be a shame if you had to go back to corporate life after such a bold venture. Speaking of corporate life, he turned deliberately to Vivian. How are the final discussions? Going with Meridian Systems? Richard mentioned the acquisition might be announced before the new year. The conversation shifted to Vertex internal matters from which I was naturally excluded, effectively ending my productive discussion with Vivian. As Greg dominated the interaction with insider references and company-specific terminology, I excused myself gracefully, promising to follow up with Vivian about the meeting she had proposed. As I made my way to the ladies' room for a moment of quiet, I caught Eliza's concerned glance from across the room. I gave her a reassuring smile. I had dealt with Greg's behavior for years and wasn't about to let it ruin a potentially valuable networking opportunity. Besides, Vivian had seemed genuinely interested in TrustFlow, despite his attempts to diminish it. In the elegant restroom, as I reapplied my lipstick under flattering lighting, I reminded myself why I had started TrustFlow in the first place. I had seen firsthand at Marshall Financial how outdated trust accounting systems created inefficiencies, errors, and frustrations for both institutions and beneficiaries. My solution wasn't just a business opportunity. It was addressing a real need that affected people's financial security and peace of mind. No amount of condescension from Greg could change that reality. When I returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The string quartet had been replaced by a DJ playing upbeat but unobtrusive music, and the formal dinner portion of the evening was beginning. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back of the room, noting with mixed feelings that I had been placed with strangers rather than at Greg and Eliza's table near the front where the executives were gathered. As servers delivered the first course, I introduced myself to my table mates, mostly mid-level Vertex employees and their partners who were pleasant, if not particularly strategic connections. The conversation flowed easily enough, touching on industry trends and the obligatory holiday party small talk. It was during the main course that the evening took its first dramatic turn. Richard Harmon, the chief strategy officer, took to the small stage at the front of the room, tapping his microphone to gather everyone's attention. "Good evening, Vertex family and honored guests," he began with practiced charm. "Before we continue our celebrations, I wanted to share some exciting company news that we've been keeping under wraps until tonight." The room quieted as everyone gave him their attention. At the executive table, I could see Greg leaning forward slightly, his expression attentive and eager. As many of you know, Vertex has been expanding our financial services division over the past year, Richard continued. Today, I'm thrilled to announce our newest strategic acquisition, a move that will significantly enhance our offerings in the trust management space. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The trust management space was precisely where TrustFlow operated. A major acquisition by Vertex could either create an opportunity or pose a serious competitive threat to our business. After extensive evaluation of the market, we've identified a company with revolutionary technology that addresses a critical pain point for our enterprise clients, Richard was saying. Their innovative approach to trust accounting systems represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking solution Vertex wants to bring to our clients. A chill ran through me as his words echoed my own pitch language almost exactly. Had someone at Vertex been studying our materials? Was this announcement about a competitor who had developed similar technology? The company's impressive metrics speak for themselves: 40% year-over-year client growth, 97% retention rate, and a remarkable decrease in customer acquisition costs over the past quarter. Those were TrustFlow's exact numbers, the same ones I had just mentioned to Greg and Vivian. My mind raced with confusion and a growing sense of alarm. How was Richard Harmon announcing our metrics to a room full of people? While the formal paperwork is still being finalized, I wanted our Vertex family to be the first to know about this exciting new addition to our portfolio, Richard continued with a broad smile. And we're particularly fortunate that the visionary founder behind this innovation is actually with us here tonight. My table mates began glancing around this room curiously. I sat frozen, a strange buzzing in my ears as I tried to process what was happening. In fact, Richard's voice cut through my confusion, I believe she's the sister-in-law of our own Greg Peterson. He gestured toward Greg, who appeared completely blindsided, his usual composed expression replaced by open shock. Nora Chen, would you please join me on stage to say a few words about TrustFlow and our exciting new partnership? Every head in the ballroom turned, searching for me as a spotlight swept the room and finally settled on my stunned face. I sat completely still for several heartbeats, my brain struggling to process what was happening. A partnership with Vertex Technologies? This was the first I'd heard of it. The spotlight remained fixed on me, its heat matching the flush spreading across my face as hundreds of curious eyes tracked my every move. Somehow, I managed to rise from my chair with what I hoped appeared as composed confidence rather than the stunned confusion I actually felt. As I made my way toward the stage, I caught Eliza's bewildered expression. Clearly, she was as surprised as I was. Greg, meanwhile, had transformed from shocked to thunderous, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitching from across the room. Richard Harmon extended his hand as I approached the small stage, his practiced smile never wavering. Nora Chen, everyone, the innovative mind behind TrustFlow, he announced as polite applause filled the ballroom. When he passed me the microphone, I took a deep breath and drew on every presentation skill I'd developed pitching to investors over the past 2 years. Thank you, Richard, for that unexpected introduction, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. While this announcement comes as a surprise tonight, I'm certainly excited about the potential collaboration between TrustFlow and Vertex Technologies. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vivian Maida watching me with keen interest, a slight nod encouraging me to continue. Whatever was happening, she was clearly involved. For those who aren't familiar with our work, I continued, settling into the familiar rhythm of my pitch. TrustFlow was born from a simple observation. Trust accounting systems have remained essentially unchanged for decades, creating inefficiencies that cost financial institutions millions annually while frustrating beneficiaries who deserve better service and transparency. As I spoke about our mission and technology, my initial confusion gave way to the genuine passion that had driven me to leave my secure corporate job and pursue this vision. The audience seemed genuinely engaged, particularly the technology, professionals who understood the complexity of the problem we were solving. We built TrustFlow to transform this overlooked but critical financial infrastructure, I concluded, and I look forward to exploring how our technology might integrate with Vertex's impressive suite of enterprise solutions. I handed the microphone back to Richard, adding quietly, though I think we have some details to discuss. Richard laughed as though I'd made a charming joke rather than pointed out that I'd been blindsided by this supposed partnership. Indeed we do, Nora. Indeed we do. Please join us at the executive table for dessert. We have much to talk about. As applause filled the room and I descended from the stage, I felt a curious mixture of emotions, confusion and wariness, certainly, but also an unexpected thrill. Whatever game was being played here, it had just thrust TrustFlow into the spotlight in front of precisely the kind of industry partners we had been trying to reach for months. The path to the executive table took me past my original seat, where I quickly retrieved my clutch, and then past Greg and Eliza's table. My sister reached out to squeeze my hand as I passed. "What's happening?" she whispered urgently. "I have no idea," I murmured back, "but I'm going to find out." Greg didn't meet my eyes as I passed, his attention deliberately fixed on his dessert plate, his posture rigid with what appeared to be barely contained anger. At the executive table, Richard pulled out the chair beside him, directly across from Vivian Mehta, who observed me with what I could only describe as calculating approval. Also at the table were several other Vertex executives I recognized, from industry publications and events, all watching me with newfound interest. "That was quite an impressive impromptu speech," Richard commented as I took my seat. "Demonstrates the quick thinking we value at Vertex." "Thank you," I replied, evenly, though I typically prefer to be briefed before public announcements about my company. A ripple of amusement passed around the table, not mocking, I realized, but appreciative of my directness. "A fair point," Richard conceded, "but sometimes opportunity presents itself in unexpected ways." Vivian leaned forward slightly. "When we spoke earlier, your articulation of TrustFlow's value proposition confirmed what our market research had already suggested, that your solution addresses a critical gap in our offering to financial services clients. Our preliminary due diligence suggests that TrustFlow's technology would integrate well with our existing architecture," added a man I recognized as Vertex's chief technology officer. "And your client growth metrics are frankly impressive for a company at your stage." My mind raced to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just idle talk. They were speaking as though an acquisition or partnership was already in motion, yet I had signed no documents, had no prior discussions, beyond my brief conversation with Vivian earlier that evening. "I appreciate your interest in TrustFlow," I said carefully, "and I'm certainly open to exploring potential synergies between our companies. But to be clear, there is currently no formal agreement between us." Richard exchanged glances with Vivian before responding. "Absolutely correct. Tonight's announcement was, perhaps, premature in its specificity. Consider it more an expression of serious intent." "Very serious intent," Vivian emphasized, "with an accelerated timeline." As servers delivered elaborate desserts to the table, the conversation shifted to what seemed like an informal but detailed exploration of how a partnership might be structured. Questions about TrustFlow's technology architecture, scalability plans, and client implementation process flowed naturally from various executives. I answered each query with precision, years of preparation allowing me to present our company's capabilities confidently despite the unusual circumstances. Throughout this impromptu business discussion, I couldn't help but notice Greg at his table, watching our interaction with barely concealed distress. Several times he attempted to catch Richard's attention, only to be politely but firmly ignored. As the formal dinner concluded and guests began to mingle again, Richard placed a business card on the table beside my dessert plate. "My private number," he explained. "I'd like you to come to my office Monday morning at 9 a.m. to continue this discussion more formally. Vivian and our legal team will be present." "I'll be there," I confirmed, tucking the card into my clutch. This unexpected opportunity, however strangely it had materialized, was too valuable to dismiss, regardless of the circumstances. As the executives dispersed to socialize with other guests, I finally had a moment to process what had just occurred. Whatever game Richard Harmon was playing, he had effectively elevated TrustFlow from an unknown startup to a company worthy of public recognition by one of the industry's major players. The strategic value of such an endorsement was incalculable, regardless of whether a formal partnership materialized. I was gathering my thoughts, preparing to find Eliza and try to make sense of the evening, when Greg appeared beside my chair, his expression tightly controlled but his eyes blazing. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded in a low voice, clearly struggling to maintain a professional demeanor in the public setting. "I'm as surprised by all this as you are," I replied calmly. I had no idea Richard was planning. Any announcement tonight? Right. Greg's skepticism was palpable. You just happened to be prepared with the perfect pitch the moment he called you up. You've been working this angle behind my back, haven't you? Using Eliza to get an invitation, then somehow getting to Vivian. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. Greg, until tonight, I'd never even met Vivian Mehta. Whatever is happening here, I didn't orchestrate it. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? He hissed, leaning closer. My own sister-in-law, someone I've been telling everyone, is playing entrepreneur with a hobby business, suddenly being courted by our executive team? Richard completely blindsided me in front of the entire company. And there it was, the real issue. Not that I might have manipulated the situation, which I hadn't, but that his dismissive characterization of my work had been publicly contradicted by his own superiors. Perhaps, I suggested quietly, the problem isn't that I'm being taken seriously, but that you never did. His face flushed darker. You have no idea how things work at this level of business. Richard and Vivian are playing some kind of political game, and they're using you, and by extension me, as pawns. There's no way they're actually interested in your little trust accounting project. Despite years of weathering Greg's condescension, this dismissal in the wake of what had just transpired stung particularly sharply. Before I could respond, however, a new voice joined our conversation. On the contrary, Greg, we're extremely interested in Ms. Chen's little project, as you call it. Vivian Mehta had approached without either of us noticing, her expression pleasant, but her eyes coolly assessing. TrustFlow's solution to the trust accounting problem is exactly the type of innovation we've been seeking. Our financial services, clients have been demanding this functionality for over a year. Greg straightened immediately, shifting into his professional demeanor. Of course, Vivian. I simply meant that the traditional acquisition process usually involves more extensive due diligence before public announcements. Usually, yes, Vivian agreed. But when you've been watching a particular company's development as closely as we've been monitoring TrustFlow, sometimes you need to move decisively. She turned to me. We've had TrustFlow on our acquisition target list for approximately 6 months, ever since your presentation at the Financial Innovation Summit in Chicago. I remembered that presentation, a small breakout session that had seemed poorly attended at the time. Apparently, it had made more of an impact than I'd realized. I had no idea Vertex had representatives there, I admitted. We make it a point to look beyond the headline speakers, Vivian explained. Often the most promising innovations come from smaller sessions where real problems are being solved rather than buzzwords being promoted. Greg's expression had become increasingly strained as this exchange continued. If you'll excuse me, he said with forced politeness, I should check on Eliza. Nora, we'll talk about this later. As he walked away, his back rigid with suppressed emotion, Vivian watched him go with a thoughtful expression. Your brother-in-law seems quite surprised by tonight's developments, she observed. Greg has never taken my business particularly seriously, I acknowledged, seeing little point in pretending otherwise. He tends to view startups as high-risk hobbies rather than legitimate enterprises. A perspective not uncommon among those who've spent their careers exclusively in established corporations, Vivian noted, though one might expect more support from family. There was something in her tone, a personal understanding perhaps, that made me wonder about her own career journey. Before I could consider this further, she continued in a more businesslike manner. I should clarify something about tonight's announcement. While Richard may have implied an acquisition, what we're actually proposing is a strategic partnership, with investment, at least initially. We'd take a minority stake in TrustFlow while integrating your technology with our financial services platform. Depending on the success of that integration, a full acquisition could follow in 12 to 18 months. This approach made much more sense than an outright acquisition of a company at our stage. It would give Vertex the technology integration they wanted while allowing TrustFlow to maintain its independence and continue developing our core product. That structure would be much more aligned with our current goals, I acknowledged. Though I'd need to discuss specific terms with my co-founder and our investors. Of course, Vivian nodded. We'll have term sheets prepared for Monday's meeting. I suggest bringing your legal counsel as well. As the evening continued, I circulated through the party with a new sense of purpose and, I had to admit, satisfaction. The same Vertex employees who had barely registered my presence earlier now sought me out, curious about TrustFlow and eager to establish a connection with someone their executives had publicly endorsed. I was engaged in conversation with a group of Vertex engineers when Eliza finally managed to pull me aside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What on earth is happening?" she demanded in a hushed voice. "Greg is absolutely beside himself. He said Richard and the executive team are pursuing some kind of deal with your company." I gave her the condensed version of the evening's unexpected developments, watching her expression shift from worried to increasingly impressed. "So your company is actually being considered for partnership by Vertex? The same company Greg said would never be more than a nice try?" "Apparently so," I confirmed, though I'm still processing it myself. Eliza's face broke into a slow, delighted smile. "Oh my God, Nora. Do you realize what this means? All those times Greg dismissed what you were building, all his condescending advice about how you should go back to corporate life where you'd have security." "I'm trying not to focus on that aspect," I admitted, though the irony wasn't lost on me. This is a business opportunity, not personal vindication. "It can be both," Eliza pointed out, then glanced across the room to where Greg was engaged in intense conversation with several colleagues, his gestures more animated than his usual controlled corporate demeanor. "Though I think I need to go rescue my husband from himself before he says something he'll regret professionally. We'll talk tomorrow?" After Eliza departed, I decided it was time for me to leave as well. The evening had been productive beyond my wildest expectations, but the emotional and mental energy required to navigate its unexpected developments had left me drained. As I retrieved my coat from the check station, I felt a presence behind me and turned to find Richard Harmon. "Leaving so soon, Ms. Chen?" he inquired. The party usually continues well past midnight. "It's been an eventful evening," I replied, diplomatically. "And I have a lot to process before our Monday meeting." Richard nodded, helping me with my coat with old-fashioned courtesy. "I imagine you do. I also imagine you're wondering why we approached a potential partnership in such an unconventional manner." The thought had crossed my mind, I acknowledged. He guided me slightly away from the coat check, toward a quieter alcove in the hotel's opulent lobby. "Vertex is at an inflection point," he explained, his voice lowered for privacy. "We've built a substantial business on enterprise software, but the market is shifting rapidly. Companies that don't innovate become irrelevant. And TrustFlow represents innovation in a sector you're targeting," I supplied. "Precisely. But more importantly, you represent the kind of leadership thinking we need." He studied me with shrewd assessment. "Your brother-in-law Greg is a competent executor. He implements established playbooks efficiently. But from what I've observed, he lacks the vision to identify new opportunities or the courage to pursue them against conventional wisdom." I remained carefully neutral, unwilling to criticize Greg to his boss despite our differences. "Tonight," Richard continued, "I wanted to observe how you handle the unexpected. Would you freeze under pressure, become flustered, retreat to safe talking points? Instead, you delivered a compelling, articulate vision despite being completely blindsided." He smiled slightly. "That's the kind of leadership agility Vertex needs more of." Before I could fully process the implications of his statement, he extended his hand formally. Until Monday, Ms. Chen. I look forward to a productive discussion. As my rideshare navigated the city streets toward my apartment, my mind raced with the evening's developments. What had begun as an obligatory family-adjacent networking event had somehow transformed into a potential game-changing opportunity for TrustFlow. And beneath the business considerations lurked the personal satisfaction, which I tried unsuccessfully to suppress, of having my work so publicly validated in front of the very person who had most consistently dismissed it. By the time I arrived home, it was nearly midnight. I kicked off my heels at the door, padding in stocking feet to the kitchen where I found Tasha still awake, laptop open on the counter and legal briefs spread around her. "You're back earlier than I expected," she observed, glancing up from her work. "How was the corporate holiday extravaganza? Did Greg manage to be condescending about your cute little startup within the first 5 minutes? Or did he at least wait until after appetizers?" I set my clutch on the counter, trying to find words to encapsulate the evening's bizarre turn of events. Greg's boss announced to the entire company that they're pursuing a strategic partnership with TrustFlow. I was called on stage to speak about it. I have a meeting Monday morning with their executive team and legal department to discuss terms. Tasha's jaw literally dropped. "I'm sorry, what?" That was pretty much my reaction too, I admitted, reaching for the bottle of wine she had opened beside her work materials and pouring myself a glass. "But that's incredible," she stammered. "Vertex Technologies is huge. A partnership with them would completely change TrustFlow's trajectory." "I know." I sank onto one of the kitchen stools, suddenly feeling the full weight of the evening's emotional roller coaster. "And the strangest part is, I had nothing to do with setting it up. They've apparently been watching our company for months." "And how did your darling brother-in-law react to this development?" Tasha asked with poorly concealed glee. She had witnessed firsthand the many times Greg had undermined my confidence or dismissed my business acumen at family gatherings. "About as well as you'd expect," I admitted. "He accused me of manipulating the situation somehow, using Eliza, to get access to his company's executives." Tasha snorted derisively. "Of course he did. Heaven forbid he acknowledged that you've actually built something valuable and his own bosses recognized it before he did." "It's not about Greg," I said, firmly, though a small part of me couldn't help but savor the reversal. "This is about TrustFlow's future. A partnership with Vertex could help us scale in ways that would otherwise take years." "It can be about both," Tasha countered, echoing Eliza's earlier sentiment. "You're allowed to feel professional satisfaction and personal vindication simultaneously." God knows Greg wouldn't hesitate to gloat if the situations were reversed. She wasn't wrong. For 2 years, I had weathered Greg's thinly veiled mockery, his constant reminders of startup failure statistics, his helpful suggestions that I consider returning to corporate life before the gap in my resume became too problematic. All delivered with the smug certainty of someone who believed his path, the safe, traditional corporate ladder, was inherently superior to the risk I had taken. I sipped my wine thoughtfully. Richard Harmon, Greg's boss, said something interesting just before I left. He said that Greg is a competent executor but lacks vision and courage. Ouch, Tasha winced appreciatively. That's corporate speak. For has reached his ceiling, isn't it? I nodded slowly. I think Richard might be considering more than just a partnership with TrustFlow. Some of his comments suggested he's evaluating leadership more broadly. Wait, Tasha straightened, her legal briefs forgotten. Are you saying they might be interested in acquiring not just your company but you as an executive? I don't know, I admitted, but Monday's meeting just became even more complex. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It read simply, "Impressive recovery tonight. Most people wouldn't have maintained such composure when surprised. Looking forward to our discussion. Vivian Mehta." I stared at the message for a long moment, wondering again about the unusual approach Vertex had taken. There were more traditional ways to initiate partnership discussions than a public announcement at a holiday party. What game was being played here? And what were the real stakes? One thing was certain: Monday's meeting would require careful preparation. I would need to consult our lawyers, brief May and our other team members, and develop a clear understanding of what partnership terms would be acceptable to us. This opportunity, however unexpectedly it had arrived, might be exactly what TrustFlow needed to reach the next level of growth. As I set my phone on the nightstand, it buzzed again, this time with a message from Eliza. "Greg's still fuming. Says Richard has never shown interest in his projects the way he responded to your presentation tonight. I think you just changed the whole dynamic. Call me tomorrow?" I typed a quick response promising to call, then set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling, my mind still processing the evening's extraordinary turn of events. For 2 years, I had focused intensely on building TrustFlow, believing in its potential even when others, particularly Greg, had dismissed it as a naive dream destined for failure. Tonight, in one unexpected moment on stage, everything had shifted. The question now was not whether TrustFlow would succeed, but how I would navigate that success, especially when it intersected so dramatically with family dynamics I had been carefully managing for years. Tomorrow would require strategic thinking about the business opportunity. But tonight, as I drifted toward sleep, I allowed myself a moment to simply appreciate the sweetness of being recognized for exactly what Greg had most consistently dismissed: my vision, my business acumen, and my leadership potential. Sleep eluded me that night. I found myself at my living room desk at 3 a.m., surrounded by TrustFlow business plans, investor presentations, and financial projections. Not because I wasn't prepared for Monday's meeting, but because the familiar documents grounded me amid the swirling possibilities that Vertex's interest had suddenly opened. My phone lit up with a text notification surprising me at this hour. It was from May. "Just landed back from Seattle. Saw your messages. Vertex Technologies? Call me when you wake up, no matter how early." I smiled, realizing I wasn't the only one processing tonight's developments in the pre-dawn hours. May had been visiting her parents for the weekend, but had apparently checked her messages upon landing. I dialed her immediately. "You're awake," I said when she answered. "Of course I'm awake," she replied, her voice vibrating with energy despite the hour. "My co-founder just got ambushed with a partnership announcement from one of the biggest enterprise software companies in the country. Start talking." For the next hour, I detailed the surreal events of the holiday party while May alternated between excited exclamations and strategic questions. As TrustFlow's technical co-founder, her primary concerns centered on integration challenges and maintaining the integrity of our core technology. "This could be incredible for scaling," she acknowledged, "but we need to be careful about maintaining control of our IP. Vertex has a history of absorbing smaller companies and stripping out their innovative elements while discarding the original vision." Vivian Mehta specifically mentioned a minority stake with integration first, full acquisition potentially later, I reminded her. "That gives us leverage to structure protections." "Still, we should prepare for aggressive terms," May cautioned. "Companies like Vertex don't make public overtures like this unless they want something badly, which means we have more negotiating power than they'll want us to realize." By sunrise, we had outlined our partnership requirements, identified potential deal breakers, and scheduled an emergency call with our lead investors and legal counsel for Sunday afternoon. As exhaustion finally caught up with me, I felt a profound gratitude for May's pragmatic brilliance. Where I might get caught up in the personal validation of Vertex's interest, May remained focused on ensuring any partnership would serve TrustFlow's long-term vision. After a few hours of fitful sleep, I awoke to find my phone overflowing with notifications. News of Vertex's interest in TrustFlow had spread through industry channels with remarkable speed. Former colleagues, fellow entrepreneurs, and even a few investors who had previously declined to fund us were suddenly eager to connect. Most surprising was an email from my former boss at Marshall Financial, Laurent Stevens. Nora, hearing. Interesting things about TrustFlow and Vertex. Many of us here always knew you were onto something significant. Let's catch up soon. Proud of what you're building. The message struck me as particularly ironic given Laurent's reaction when I'd resigned to start TrustFlow. Trust accounting automation? That's a niche within a niche, he had dismissed. You're throwing away a promising career to chase a market that barely exists. I was contemplating this remarkable reversal when Eliza called. Can we meet for coffee? She asked, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Without Greg. Just us. An hour later, I found myself at Westview Cafe, a quiet spot halfway between our apartments. Eliza was already there when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs on the table before her. Despite being immaculately dressed as always, she looked tired, with shadows under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as I had. You look exhausted, she said by way of greeting, pushing a cappuccino toward me as I sat down. Pot? Kettle? I replied with a small smile. Rough night? She sighed, rubbing her temple. Greg barely slept. He kept pacing, making calls, checking, emails. I've never seen him this rattled. A twinge of guilt surfaced despite myself. Whatever professional rivalry existed between Greg and me, Eliza was caught in the middle, and I never wanted to make things difficult for my sister. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I had no idea any of this would happen. It's not your fault, she assured me quickly. And honestly, Nora, part of me is thrilled for you. I've watched you pour everything into TrustFlow for 2 years while Greg constantly undermined your confidence, but he's your husband, and this situation is complicated for you, I finished for her. She nodded, grateful for my understanding. He came home last night talking about office politics and manipulation, convinced Richard Harmon is using this situation to humiliate him somehow. I sipped my coffee thoughtfully. From my conversation with Richard, I don't think this is about Greg at all. Vertex genuinely seems interested in our technology. That's almost harder for Greg to accept, Eliza admitted. The idea that your hobby business, his words not mine, has genuine value that his own company recognizes while he dismissed it. It challenges his entire self-concept. The insight struck me as remarkably perceptive. Greg's identity was deeply intertwined with his corporate success and business judgment. Having misjudged TrustFlow so completely, and so publicly, didn't just embarrass him, it undermined his professional self-image. What can I do? I asked, genuinely wanting to minimize the strain on my sister. Eliza shook her head slightly. Nothing. This is Greg's reckoning, not yours. He needs to recalibrate his understanding of success and value. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Just promise me something? Anything. Don't let his attitude over the years affect your business decisions now. If partnering with Vertex is right for TrustFlow, do it, regardless of how it might impact Greg's ego. Her generosity in that moment, putting my success ahead of her husband's comfort, moved me deeply. I promise, I assured her. This will be a business decision, not a personal one. After Eliza left, I remained at the cafe, reviewing notes for the afternoon's call with our investors. The space gradually filled with weekend patrons, families sharing brunch, students with laptops, couples lingering over coffee. Normal. People with normal Sunday concerns, none of them facing partnership negotiations that could completely transform their professional future. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice the man who stopped beside my table until he spoke. Ms. Chen? Nora Chen? Looking up, I was startled to see Thomas Reeves, Vertex's chief financial officer, one of the executives, from last night's table. He was dressed casually now in jeans and a sweater, so different from his formal attire that I almost didn't recognize him. "Mr. Reeves," I acknowledged, quickly gathering my scattered papers. "This is unexpected." "Please, call me Tom," he said with an easy smile. "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair across from me. I nodded, curious about this coincidental meeting. "Do you live in this neighborhood?" "My daughter does," explained. "Sunday ritual. I pick up pastries from the bakery down the street, then we have coffee and catch up on her week." He glanced at my papers. "Preparing for tomorrow's meeting, I see." "Just organizing my thoughts," I replied carefully, unsure how much to reveal outside the formal negotiation context. He seemed to understand my caution. "I'm not here to discuss business specifics. Those are for tomorrow. But I wanted to share something that might provide useful context." He paused, considering his words. "Richard Harmon sees Vertex at a crossroads. Our core business is strong, but innovation has stagnated. We're profitable but not growing in the ways that excite top talent or investors." I listened attentively, sensing he was offering valuable insight into Vertex's strategic thinking. Richard believes, and I agree, that companies either evolve or die slowly. There's no maintaining the status quo in tech. Tom leaned forward slightly. "What many at Vertex don't yet understand is that Richard isn't just looking to acquire promising technology. He's looking to transform our leadership culture." The comment echoed Richard's cryptic remarks about Greg being a competent executor rather than a visionary. "That's why last night's approach was so unconventional," Tom continued. "Richard wanted to observe how different types of leaders within our organization would respond to disruption." His expression grew thoughtful. "Some became defensive, some opportunistic, others paralyzed. You, however, adapted with remarkable poise." "I've had practice navigating unexpected challenges," I said simply. "That's essentially the startup experience." Tom nodded appreciatively. "Precisely Richard's point. We need more of that adaptability at Vertex." He glanced at his watch and stood. "I should get those pastries before my daughter thinks I've forgotten our tradition." "I just wanted you to understand. Tomorrow isn't just about TrustFlow's technology. It's about a broader vision for Vertex's future leadership." As he walked away, his casual revelation left me with a dawning realization. The meeting tomorrow might be about much more than a minority investment or technology partnership. It might be about my role in Vertex's future leadership structure, a possibility both exhilarating and complicated given Greg's position in the company. The afternoon investor call proved more supportive than I had anticipated. Our lead venture, capitalist Eleanor Winters, viewed Vertex's interest as validation of TrustFlow's market potential and was surprisingly open to partnership structures that might eventually lead to acquisition. The trust accounting space isn't large enough to support a multi-billion-dollar standalone company, she pointed out pragmatically. A strategic partnership with Vertex gives you distribution channels and enterprise clients you'd spend years trying to reach independently. Our attorney, Michael Hayes, was more cautious, outlining critical protections we should demand regarding our intellectual property, earn-out structures, and leadership autonomy during any integration phase. By Sunday evening, we had developed a clear negotiation strategy with defined parameters for acceptable terms. May would join me at the meeting to address technical integration questions, while Michael would handle legal considerations. What remained unresolved were the personal implications. If Vertex was indeed considering me for a leadership role beyond the TrustFlow integration, how would that impact my relationship with Eliza if I became, effectively, Greg's superior in the corporate hierarchy? These thoughts still occupied me. Monday morning, as I dressed for the meeting, selecting a navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. As I fastened my grandmother's jade pendant, a talisman I wore for important occasions, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Nora Chen," I answered, expecting perhaps a last-minute communication from Vertex. "Ms. Chen, this is Sandra Walsh, Richard Harmon's executive assistant." The woman's voice was brisk and efficient. "There's been a change of venue for this morning's meeting. Mr. Harmon asks that you and your team come directly to the executive conference room on the 32nd floor, rather than the legal department." This deviation from the original plan, meeting first with legal and Vivian Mehta, seemed significant. "May I ask why the change?" "Mr. Harmon has decided to personally lead the discussion," Sandra explained. "He feels the potential partnership warrants CEO-level attention from the outset." After confirming the new time and location, I called May to update her. "The executive conference room," she repeated thoughtfully. "That's where board meetings happen. This is definitely not a standard partnership discussion anymore." "Tom Reeves implied as much yesterday," I told her, sharing the CFO's comments about Richard's broader vision for Vertex's leadership transformation. "So, what are we walking into?" May asked bluntly. "A technology partnership discussion or a leadership recruitment meeting?" "I think we need to be prepared for both," I admitted. "But our priority remains protecting TrustFlow's vision and technology regardless of the broader context." We agreed to meet in the lobby of Vertex's downtown headquarters 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. As I gathered my materials and headed for the door, a text arrived from Eliza. "Good luck today. Greg left for the office at 6 a.m. He's been called to a separate meeting with HR and his department head at 10. Something's definitely happening." The timing couldn't be coincidence. Whatever Richard Harmon was orchestrating, it appeared to involve parallel discussions with both Greg and me, scheduled for the exact same time. Vertex Technologies occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming glass tower in the financial district. The lobby featured the requisite sleek minimalism of successful tech companies, lots of white space, subtle branding, and an air of quiet confidence. May and Michael were waiting when I arrived, both projecting professional calm, though I could sense May's underlying excitement. As a technical founder, she'd spent most of her career creating innovations that business people took credit for. The prospect of our technology being recognized at this level clearly energized her. "Ready for this?" she asked as we checked in with reception. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my jacket with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. The executive floor projected power through understated luxury, wood paneling, original artwork, and spectacular views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sandra Walsh, a precisely groomed woman in her 50s, met us at the elevator. "Mr. Harmon is looking forward to your discussion," she informed us, leading the way down a corridor lined with meeting rooms. "The others are already assembled." The others, it turned out, comprised more senior leadership than I had anticipated. Seated around the massive conference table were Richard Harmon, Vivian Mehta, Tom Reeves, and 3 additional executives, including the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Revenue Officer. Conspicuously absent was anyone from the legal department. "Ms. Chen, welcome," Richard rose to greet us. "And Ms. Liu and Mr. Hayes, thank you for joining us this morning." After introductions and brief pleasantries, Richard remained standing at the head of the table, his posture suggesting this would not be a conventional negotiation. "I believe in transparency," he began. "So let me be direct about Vertex's interest. In TrustFlow, we're not merely seeking a technology partnership or minority investment. We're proposing a full acquisition with an integration plan that would preserve TrustFlow's core innovation while leveraging Vertex's distribution channels and enterprise relationships." Beside me, I felt Michael stiffen slightly at this opening. Position. So different from the partnership structure Vivian had outlined Friday night. "However," Richard continued, "what makes this proposal unique is our interest not just in TrustFlow's technology, but in its leadership. Specifically, Ms. Chen, we're impressed with your vision, execution, and ability to identify market opportunities others have overlooked, qualities Vertex needs to cultivate more actively." He pressed a button on a remote, and a presentation appeared on the wall screen. Project Renaissance, Strategic Acquisition and Leadership Integration. Vertex is undertaking a significant reorganization, Richard explained. We're creating a new financial innovation division that will encompass several existing products and business units, including our banking and investment management verticals. This division requires leadership with both technical understanding and entrepreneurial vision. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Richard made it explicit. As part of the acquisition terms, we're proposing that you, Nora, would join Vertex's executive leadership as Senior Vice President of Financial Innovation, reporting directly to me. The proposal was so far beyond what I had anticipated that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. A full acquisition, rather than partnership, plus an executive role several levels above where most acquired founders typically land in corporate hierarchies. May recovered first. And the technical team? What role would we play in this structure? Tom Reeves addressed her question. We envision integrating TrustFlow's engineering team as the core innovation unit within the new division. You, Ms. Liu, would lead that team as Chief Technology Officer for Financial Innovation, maintaining continuity while gaining resources to accelerate development. As the conversation progressed into specific terms, acquisition price, equity, packages, integration timelines, I found my mind continually returning to one unasked question. Where did Greg fit in this reorganization? His role in Vertex's banking vertical would logically place him within this new financial innovation division, potentially under my leadership. When there was a natural pause in the discussion, I addressed this directly. This proposal is compelling, but I need to understand how it affects existing Vertex personnel, particularly those currently working in the banking and investment verticals. Richard and Vivian exchanged glances before Richard responded. A fair question. The reorganization involves significant leadership changes throughout those divisions. Some current managers will transition to new roles, others will remain in revised positions. And my brother-in-law, Greg Peterson? I asked, feeling it necessary to acknowledge the relationship explicitly. Where would he fit in this structure? The room grew noticeably quieter. Richard's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Mr. Peterson is currently discussing his future options with HR and his department head. We value his contributions to Vertex but believe his talents might be better utilized in our enterprise client services division rather than financial innovation. In corporate terms, this was a sidestep at best, possibly a demotion, moving from a product division to a support function. The personal implications were staggering. Whatever I decided about Vertex's offer would directly impact Greg's career trajectory. I appreciate your candor, I said carefully. Given the personal connection, I want to be transparent as well. Any decision I make needs to be based on what's best for TrustFlow's technology and team, not on family dynamics. But those dynamics are a reality I can't ignore in considering an executive role. Richard nodded with what appeared to be genuine understanding. We wouldn't expect you to. Family relationships matter, and pretending otherwise would be disingenuous. What we do expect is professional judgment and leadership integrity, qualities you've already demonstrated. The meeting continued for another hour, delving into technical integration plans, compensation structures, and transition timelines. Throughout, I was impressed by how thoroughly Vertex had evaluated TrustFlow's technology and market position. This wasn't a hasty decision or opportunistic acqui-hire. They had been systematically assessing us for months. As the discussion wound down, Richard suggested we take 48 hours to consider the proposal before reconvening. This is a significant decision for everyone involved, he acknowledged. We want you to have time to evaluate it properly. As we gathered our materials to leave, Vivian approached me privately. A word of advice, she offered quietly. Don't let personal considerations override professional opportunities. I declined a significant promotion once because it would have meant managing my husband's department. 6 months later, he left the company anyway, and I had sacrificed a career advancement for nothing. Her candor surprised me. Voice of experience? Indeed, she confirmed with a rueful smile. Family dynamics are important, but they shouldn't define your professional ceiling. Outside Vertex's building, Michael and I found a nearby cafe to debrief. Michael immediately launched into analysis of the acquisition terms, which were, indeed, generous, well above standard multiples for a company at our stage. From a purely financial perspective, this is an exceptional offer, he concluded. The equity package for both founders is particularly strong, with reasonable vesting terms and performance triggers. May was equally enthusiastic about the technical aspects. The resources they're offering would accelerate our development roadmap by years. And maintaining our team's integrity rather than dispersing us throughout their organization shows they genuinely value what we've built. Both valid points, yet neither addressed the elephant in the room. And the Greg situation? I prompted. Me shrugged. Not our problem, frankly. He's consistently underestimated both you and TrustFlow. If that's resulted in his company recognizing your value before he did, that's on him. It's more complicated than that, I sighed. He's married. To my sister. Family gatherings for the next 30 years could be exceedingly awkward if I become his boss, or worse, if he blames me for a perceived demotion. That's assuming he stays at Vertex, Michael pointed out pragmatically. Many executives in his position would update their resumes and quietly begin searching for opportunities elsewhere. The observation gave me pause. Perhaps the simplest resolution would be Greg voluntarily leaving Vertex rather than accepting a diminished role, though that created its own set of family complications. Look, May said firmly, you've spent 2 years building something valuable enough that a major corporation wants not just the technology, but you as a leader. Don't diminish that achievement by making this about Greg's feelings. This is about your vision being validated at the highest level. She was right, of course. Whatever I decided needed to be based on what was best for TrustFlow's technology, our team, and my own professional growth, not on managing Greg's ego or avoiding family tension. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Greg just came home. He's been offered a transfer to Enterprise Client Services. Says the company is realigning priorities. Can we talk? The message confirmed what Richard had implied. Greg was indeed being moved to a support function rather than included in the new financial innovation division. Whether he viewed this as a demotion or lateral move would significantly impact how he processed Vertex's interest in acquiring TrustFlow and placing me in executive leadership. I need to talk with my sister, I told May and Michael. Can we reconvene tomorrow morning to continue this discussion? They agreed, and I headed directly to Eliza's apartment, steeling myself for what promised to be a challenging conversation. Whatever happened with Vertex's offer, the dynamics between Greg and me, and by extension within our extended family, had been permanently altered by the events of the past 3 days. As I approached Eliza's building, I realized this moment represented a critical juncture, not just professionally, but personally. How I navigated this conversation would reveal much about my own values and priorities. Was I willing to consider family harmony in making business decisions, or would I pursue professional opportunities regardless of personal fallout? The answer, I suspected, lay somewhere in the complicated middle ground, finding a path that honored both my professional achievement and my family relationships, without sacrificing either on the altar of the other. Eliza answered the door, looking tense but composed, her teacher's ability to maintain calm during emotional situations clearly in effect. He's in the study, she said quietly, gesturing down the hallway of their stylish downtown apartment. Been on the phone since he got home. How bad is it? I asked, keeping my voice low as I stepped inside. I'm not sure, she admitted. He's oscillating between defensiveness and strategic planning. One minute he's saying it's a political maneuver he can overcome, the next he's updating his LinkedIn profile. She squeezed my arm gently. Whatever happens with Vertex's offer to you, this isn't your fault, Nora. Remember that. Her unconditional support moved me deeply. Despite being caught in an impossible position between her husband and her sister, Eliza remained determined to be fair to both of us. We made our way to the kitchen, far enough from the study to speak privately. Eliza busied herself making tea, a habit from our childhood when difficult conversations required something to do with one's hands. "How much do you know about what Vertex is offering TrustFlow?" I asked. "Only what Greg mentioned. Something about acquisition rather than partnership, and a new division being formed." She set a steaming mug before me. He was more focused on his own situation. I nodded, unsurprised. They're proposing a full acquisition with unusually favorable terms, plus executive positions for both May and me. I took a breath before adding the most complicated part. They want me to head a new financial innovation division as senior VP, reporting directly to Richard Harmon. Eliza's eyes widened slightly as she absorbed the implications. And Greg's department would be? Under that division, yes, though they've offered him a transfer to enterprise client services instead. Which he sees as a demotion, Eliza confirmed, sitting across from me, though he's trying to frame it as a strategic realignment to anyone who asks. The study door opened, and Greg's footsteps approached the kitchen. He paused in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw me. "Nora," he acknowledged stiffly. "I didn't realize you were coming over." "I wanted to talk with both of you," I said simply. "It seems we're all facing significant decisions about Vertex." Greg entered the kitchen fully but remained standing, creating a subtle power dynamic as he towered over us at the table. His usual immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. Tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. "Yes, well, corporate reorganizations happen periodically," he said with forced casualness. "Though they're rarely announced at holiday parties without prior discussion with affected leadership." The barb wasn't subtle, but I let it pass. "I had no advance knowledge of Richard's announcement," I reminded him. "I was as surprised as you were." "Were you?" His skepticism was palpable. "Because from where I stood, you seemed remarkably prepared with your pitch. Almost as though you'd been planning this move." Eliza sighed audibly. "Greg, we've been over this. Nora didn't orchestrate anything. Richard and Vivian made a business decision based on TrustFlow's technology. A business decision that conveniently undermines my position in the company," he countered, pacing the kitchen. "After 7 years of dedication to Vertex, suddenly I'm being shifted to client services while my sister-in-law, who Richard Harmon had never even met before Friday, is being considered for executive leadership. You don't find the timing suspicious?" His perspective wasn't entirely unreasonable, I realized. From his vantage point, the situation must seem like an orchestrated humiliation, his own family member potentially being elevated above him in his company's hierarchy without warning. "I understand why this feels personal," I acknowledged, choosing my words carefully. "But from what I've gathered, Vertex has been evaluating TrustFlow for months. This isn't about you or me. It's about technology that addresses a market need they've identified as strategic." Greg laughed without humor. "That's what Richard would say, of course. It's always about strategic needs and market positioning when they're reshuffling leadership. Never about internal politics or changing favorites." "What exactly did they offer you?" I asked directly, hoping concrete details might cut through the emotional reaction. He hesitated, then relented. "Senior Director of Enterprise Client Success, focusing on financial services clients. Lateral in terms of compensation and hierarchical level, but removed from product development and strategy." His jaw tightened. a glorified customer service role. That doesn't sound like Richard is trying to push you out, I observed. If that were the goal, they wouldn't create a position aligned with your industry expertise. It's a containment strategy, Greg insisted. Keep me comfortable. Enough not to leave immediately, but move me away from core business decisions. Eliza touched his arm gently. Or maybe it's recognition that your strongest skills are in client relationships and implementation rather than product innovation. That's not a demotion, it's specialization. Her reframing was skillful, offering Greg a way to see the transfer as acknowledgement of strengths rather than punishment for weaknesses. For a moment, his defensive posture softened slightly. "What are you planning to do about Vertex's offer?" he asked me, finally taking a seat at the table. "I'm still evaluating it," I answered honestly. "The acquisition terms are favorable, and the vision for integrating our technology makes sense. But the leadership role is complicated, for obvious reasons. Because of me," he stated flatly. "Because of our family relationship," I corrected. "If I accept, it creates an awkward dynamic that affects not just us, but Eliza too." Greg studied me with an unreadable expression. "So you'd consider declining a career-making opportunity because of potential family discomfort?" The question surprised me. I had expected him to advocate for exactly that outcome. "I'm considering all factors," I said carefully. "Professional, opportunity, team impact, and yes, family dynamics too." "That's absurd," he said with unexpected vehemence. "You shouldn't make business decisions based on family politics." Eliza and I exchanged confused glances at this sudden reversal. "I thought you'd prefer I decline," I admitted. "Of course I don't love the idea of my sister-in-law potentially becoming my superior in the corporate hierarchy," he said tightly. "But I'm not so petty that I'd expect you to reject a legitimate opportunity on my account." His response, while still tinged with resentment, revealed a more complex perspective than I'd anticipated. Despite his wounded pride, Greg was acknowledging the legitimacy of Vertex's interest in TrustFlow. Perhaps the first time he'd truly recognized the value of what I'd built. "What will you do about the transfer offer?" I asked. Greg's expression turned calculating. "I've already scheduled meetings with 3 other companies. 7 years at Vertex gives me options. The question is whether to leverage those options for a better position at Vertex or make a clean break. And if I accept the acquisition and leadership role? Then my decision becomes simpler," he acknowledged. "Few executives would choose to remain in a company where a family member suddenly outranks them. The potential for perceived nepotism or conflict of interest would be professionally problematic." His answer clarified everything. If I accepted Vertex's offer, Greg would almost certainly leave, not out of personal pique, but due to legitimate professional considerations. This wasn't about family harmony versus career opportunity. The two were inextricably linked. "I appreciate your candor," I told him sincerely. "And for what it's worth, I never sought this situation." "I know," he admitted, surprising me again. "Richard has been pushing for more innovative approaches to financial technology for over a year. Your company addresses exactly what he's been demanding from our banking vertical, which I failed to deliver despite multiple opportunities." This acknowledgement that he had missed innovation opportunities that TrustFlow had successfully identified seemed to cost him considerable pride, but it also revealed a self-awareness I hadn't given him credit for possessing. "The trust accounting problem isn't obvious unless you've worked directly with the systems," I offered, extending an olive branch. "At Marshall Financial, I saw the pain points daily. You were focused on different priorities at Vertex." "That's generous of you," Greg said with a hint of his old sardonic smile. "But Richard made innovation a priority, and I treated it as secondary to maintaining existing client relationships. That was a strategic misjudgment on my part." The conversation continued for another hour, evolving from tense confrontation to something approaching professional respect. While Greg clearly struggled with the blow to his ego, he was making a visible effort to separate his personal feelings from his assessment of the business situation. As we prepared to leave, Greg surprised me once more. "For what it's worth," he said, walking me to the door, "TrustFlow is impressive. I should have recognized that sooner instead of dismissing it as a risky venture." Coming from Greg, this was tantamount to a full apology. "Thank you," I replied simply. "That means a lot." "Just promise me one thing," he added, his expression serious. "If you take the Vertex position, run that division based on merit and vision, not on what Richard or anyone else expects. The company needs real innovation, not corporate theater." His request revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated. Beneath Greg's corporate polish and political maneuvering lay genuine concern for building valuable products. His methods and priorities differed from mine, but the core commitment to creating something worthwhile was there. I would approach it exactly that way, I assured him. As I left Eliza's building, the evening sky had deepened to indigo, city, lights creating a constellation of human ambition against the darkening backdrop. The conversation with Greg had been clarifying in unexpected ways. What had seemed like a binary choice between professional opportunity and family harmony now appeared more nuanced. Greg would likely leave Vertex regardless of my decision. He had essentially said as much. But he would do so for professional reasons rather than personal affront, an important distinction for our long-term family relationship. Rather than walking directly to the subway, I found myself wandering toward the river that bordered downtown, drawn to the open space and perspective it offered. The water reflected the city lights in shimmering ribbons, a visual reminder of TrustFlow's core mission, creating transparency and flow in systems that had long been stagnant. My phone buzzed with a message from May. "Whatever you're deciding, remember we built TrustFlow to make real change in a calcified industry. Scale matters for that mission." She was right, of course. The vision that had driven us to leave secure jobs and risk everything on TrustFlow wasn't merely about building a successful company. It was about transforming how trust accounting functioned, making it more transparent, efficient, and accessible. Vertex offered the scale and distribution channels to realize that vision far more quickly than we could independently. As I stood watching the river's steady current, another message arrived, this one from Vivian Mehta. "Whatever you decide about our offer, I hope you recognize what Monday's meeting revealed. You've built something valuable enough to change an industry. That achievement stands regardless of next steps." Her perspective struck me as particularly meaningful. In the whirlwind of acquisition discussions and family complications, I had barely paused to acknowledge the fundamental reality. I had created something of genuine value, something that addressed a real need, something that industry leaders recognized as significant. For 2 years, I had weathered Greg's dismissive comments about my inevitable failure, endured patronizing advice about returning to corporate life before it was too late, and fought the self-doubt those interactions inevitably planted. Yet through it all, May and I had kept building, improving, and believing in our vision when few others did. The realization washed over me with unexpected emotional force. Whatever happened with Vertex's offer, whether I accepted the acquisition and leadership role or pursued an alternative path, I had already succeeded in the most fundamental way. I had identified a meaningful problem, created an innovative solution, and built something valuable enough to attract serious attention from industry leaders. That achievement could never be taken away, regardless of what came next. With this clarity, I turned away from the river and headed toward the subway, my decision crystallizing with each step. The path forward wasn't about choosing between professional opportunity and family harmony. It was about honoring the vision that had driven TrustFlow from the beginning while managing the personal implications with maturity and compassion. By Tuesday morning, I had reached complete clarity about Vertex's offer. After conferring with May and our investors, We scheduled a meeting with Richard Harmon for Wednesday to present our response. I also arranged to meet Eliza for lunch afterward, knowing she would want to hear the outcome directly from me. The Vertex executive floor felt different this time, less intimidating, more like a potential workspace to evaluate critically. Richard welcomed us into the same conference room, joined again by Vivian, Tom, and the other senior leaders. "Thank you for the time to consider your proposal," I began once pleasantries had been exchanged. "We've evaluated it thoroughly from both business and personal perspectives." Richard nodded encouragingly. "And your thoughts?" "We're prepared to move forward with the acquisition under the terms outlined, with 3 specific modifications." I outlined our requests: stronger protections for the core technology, accelerated vesting schedules for the TrustFlow team, and a more gradual integration timeline to ensure client continuity. "All reasonable adjustments," Richard agreed readily. "And the leadership position?" I met his gaze directly. "I'm prepared to accept the role of Senior Vice President for Financial Innovation, with one important condition." The executives exchanged curious glances. "I need complete autonomy in building the division's leadership team, based solely on merit and strategic fit. No political considerations or predetermined organizational charts." Richard's expression shifted from curiosity to approval. "That's precisely the leadership approach I was hoping you'd bring. Consider it guaranteed." The remaining discussion focused on logistics and timelines. We would announce the acquisition publicly in 2 weeks, following necessary regulatory filings and internal communications. I would officially join Vertex's executive team the following month, with May leading the technical integration. As the meeting concluded, Richard asked me to stay behind for a brief private conversation. Once the others had filed out, he addressed the elephant in the room directly. "I assume you've spoken with Greg Peterson about these developments?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It was a difficult but necessary conversation." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Family relationships in business contexts are always complicated. For what it's worth, the reorganization and his transfer offer were planned before we confirmed your identity as his sister-in-law. The trust accounting solution we needed simply happened to come from a company led by a family connection." "I believe you," I said, though from his perspective the timing naturally seemed suspicious. "Understandably so," Richard acknowledged. "Greg has contributed significantly to Vertex over the years. His client relationship skills are excellent, but the company's future requires different leadership approaches in key divisions, more innovative, more willing to challenge established patterns." His assessment matched my own observations of Greg's strengths and limitations. He mentioned he's exploring options with other companies, I noted. "Also understandable," Richard said without surprise. "Few executives would remain in an organization where family members suddenly enter senior leadership. It creates complications regardless of everyone's best intentions." There was no judgment in his tone, just practical recognition of corporate realities. "If he does decide to pursue opportunities elsewhere, I hope Vertex will support that transition gracefully," I said. "His contributions deserve recognition regardless of this reorganization." Richard smiled slightly. "That's the kind of leadership perspective we need, recognizing value while still making necessary changes. I think you'll do very well here, Nora." My lunch with Eliza afterward was bittersweet. I found her already waiting at our favorite bistro, her expression suggesting she had news of her own to share. "Greg accepted an offer from Meridian Systems this morning," she said once we were seated. "Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to their CEO. He starts next month." The timing wasn't coincidental. Greg had clearly accelerated his search process after our conversation. "That's a significant step up from his current role," I observed. "Meridian is smaller than Vertex but growing rapidly." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "He seems genuinely excited about building their financial services division from the ground up. I think this might actually be the perfect next step for him." The relief in her voice was palpable. Rather than being caught between warring family members in the same company, she was seeing both her husband and sister moving forward in positive directions. "I accepted Vertex's offer," I told her. "The acquisition will be announced in 2 weeks, and I'll join as SVP of Financial Innovation next month." "Congratulations," she said warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Nora. You created something valuable enough to transform not just your career, but an entire industry segment." Her pride meant everything. More than the acquisition offer, more than the executive title. My sister had witnessed every step of my journey, from the terrifying decision to leave Marshall Financial through the countless setbacks and small victories that had led to this moment. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't invited me to that holiday party," I pointed out with a smile. Eliza laughed softly. "I just wanted my husband to stop underestimating my brilliant sister. I never imagined it would lead to all this." "Do you think this will make things awkward between us long term?" I asked, the question that had been lingering despite the apparently clean resolution. "Greg and I working for competing companies after everything that's happened?" She considered this thoughtfully. "I think it might actually improve things. You'll both be operating in your areas of strength, without the direct comparison that caused so much tension. Success looks different for different people. Greg needed to recognize that about you, and maybe about himself too." Her insight struck me as profoundly wise. Much of the friction between Greg and me had stemmed from his insistence that professional success could only follow one legitimate path: his path of corporate advancement within established structures. My decision to pursue entrepreneurship had implicitly challenged that belief, triggering his defensive dismissal of TrustFlow's potential. The irony is that his dismissal of my hobby business ultimately led to career advancement for both of us, I observed. "Sometimes the things we resist most contain the seeds of our growth," Eliza said. "Greg needed this push to recognize he'd plateaued at Vertex. Your success forced him to reconsider his own path." Over the following weeks, as acquisition paperwork progressed and transition plans took shape, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought me to this juncture. 2 years earlier, I had left the security of corporate employment, believing deeply in a vision that few others could see. I had weathered skepticism, financial uncertainty, and countless technical challenges, driven by the conviction that trust accounting systems could and should function better. Greg's consistent dismissal of that vision had been painful, precisely because it targeted my deepest vulnerability. The fear that I was sacrificing security for an illusion, that the problem I saw wasn't significant enough to build a company around. Each time he questioned TrustFlow's viability, he reinforced those private doubts. Yet, in an unexpected twist, his underestimation had ultimately created the opportunity for both TrustFlow's technology and my leadership to be recognized at the highest levels. Had he taken my startup seriously from the beginning, had he recognized the potential value in trust accounting automation, Vertex might have developed a competing solution internally, or acquired TrustFlow much earlier, before we had established the track record that led to such favorable terms. The official acquisition announcement generated significant industry attention. Vertex Technologies acquires TrustFlow to transform trust accounting, read the headlines in financial technology publications. My appointment as senior vice president was noted as unusual. Acquired founders typically received less prominent roles or departed after earnout periods. On my first official day at Vertex, I arrived early, taking time to absorb the significance of the moment. The executive floor, now my workplace, still carried its atmosphere of power and prestige, but it no longer felt foreign or intimidating. I had earned my place here not through corporate ladder climbing, but by creating genuine value from outside the established system. Vivian Mehta appeared in my office doorway as I was arranging family photos on my desk. "That's my favorite part of a new office," she observed. "Making it personal reminds us why we do this work." I smiled, gesturing to a frame holding a photo. Of Eliza, Greg, and me at their wedding years earlier. A reminder of the complex personal connections that had influenced this professional journey. I spoke with Greg Peterson last week, Vivian mentioned casually. He seems genuinely enthusiastic about his new role at Meridian. I think it's a better fit for his strengths, I acknowledged. Building client relationships has always been his passion. And innovation has clearly been yours, she countered. Different paths, both valuable. The observation echoed Eliza's insight about success taking different forms for different people. Greg's approach, working within established structures, focusing on implementation and client management, created one kind of value. My approach, questioning fundamental assumptions, reimagining calcified systems, created another. Neither was inherently superior. They served different purposes in the business ecosystem. Richard has asked me to mentor you during your first quarter, Vivian continued. Though based on your track record, I suspect you'll be teaching me as much as I'll be guiding you. I'd welcome the collaboration, I told her sincerely. Corporate leadership is very different from startup management. I have much to learn about navigating this environment effectively. And we have much to learn about fostering genuine innovation rather than incremental improvements, she replied. That's why you're here. My first executive leadership meeting that afternoon brought the journey full circle. Seated at the massive conference table where I had once nervously pitched TrustFlow's value proposition, I was now responsible for presenting the strategic vision for Vertex's entire financial innovation division. As I stood to address the assembled leadership team, I thought about the winding path that had led to this moment, from identifying a problem that others overlooked, to building a solution despite skepticism, to having that solution recognized as valuable enough to transform not just my career, but an industry practice. Financial systems shouldn't just maintain the status quo, I began. They should create transparency, efficiency, and accessibility for everyone they serve. That vision drove TrustFlow from its inception, and it will drive Vertex's financial innovation division moving forward. The executives listened attentively as I outlined our strategic priorities and integration roadmap. When I concluded, Richard Harmon was the first to respond. This is precisely the vision Vertex needs, he affirmed. Not incremental improvement, but fundamental transformation of how financial technology serves real human needs. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave my new office, I received an unexpected text message from Greg. Saw the press release about your official start. At Vertex, the strategic vision you outlined is impressive. Different path than I would have taken, but clearly the right direction for the industry. Congratulations. The message represented something I had never quite received from him before. Professional respect. Not grudging acknowledgement, not backhanded compliments, but genuine recognition of the value I had created. I replied simply, "Thank you. Heard about your new role at Meridian as well. Looking forward to hearing how you transform their client. Relationships. Different paths, both important." As I gathered my things and headed toward the elevator, I realized that the journey had come full circle. What had begun with mockery of my failed business had transformed not only my professional trajectory, but my understanding of success itself. True success wasn't about following conventional paths or meeting others' expectations. It wasn't about proving critics wrong or achieving traditional markers of status. It was about identifying meaningful problems, creating valuable solutions, and having the courage to pursue a vision others couldn't yet see. Greg's mockery of my startup had never really been about TrustFlow's potential. It had been about his own limited perspective on what constituted legitimate professional achievement. His inability to see the value in my work reflected his constraints, not mine. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and I stepped out into the evening, no longer an outsider looking in, but a leader with the authority to shape an industry's future. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but each challenge, including Greg's dismissal, had ultimately strengthened both my resolve and my vision. Sometimes the people who underestimate you most dramatically become the unwitting catalysts for your greatest achievements. The key is recognizing that their limitations need not become your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.